Okay, so we are now getting ready to kind of finish this club up with we're going to be doing some staining, some sealing, some final touch up on the sole plate.
Yeah, when we left the club, we had just put that back screw in, and it extends a little bit. So I'm just going to take a light mill file and try and blend it in, dress it up a little bit.
Okay.
If that moves too much, what you can do is put the head in a little more solidly, and you'll get a little better bite on your file.
So we're touching up the set screw. And then back to the 100 sandpaper?
Yeah, this is...
And that's what, is that kind of with the final finish you like to do on the sole plate?
Now I'll probably go just a little finer, and then maybe steel wool it on the steel wool arbor. I don't want to over sand that. That gives us a fairly good finish.
Yeah. Now, what about these engravings up here? Is there
Well, I'm going to work on those. I'll wet them a little bit, and then I'll use a very sharp scribing tool, and I'll try and get that 6 and the 9 back, and they're all hardened. It's a little faint, but you can tell what the club is. But I'll see if I can deepen them a little bit before we're done here. Okay. It just takes handwork. It's just something you've got to put under a magnifier and take your time with. You want to do it as precisely as you can, or it looks kind of funny.
Right.
I won't bother to try and show you how we do that. I'll just do it at some point here before we finish up.
Okay.
Okay, we basically got the club ready for a final sand. A little scrap of cloth-based sandpaper. I'm going to cut about a 1/2 inch wide strip out of it. The cloth base works better because it doesn't break on you. And I'll use this to work.
And is this 100?
It doesn't much matter what this is, because what we're doing is kind of a rough sand here, but this is 100. Okay. And I'm just going to try and take some of this off the neck. I may use a little heavier grip right in here where the epoxy. If necessary, you can take a small file. This one broke, and just lightly move the epoxy out. And that was just a little heavy there. It'd take forever to sand it, so we'll just do a light file on it. Try not to get up into the shaft. You don't want to scar that if you can avoid it.
Okay, we're going to start the final sanding here.
And this is just a process that requires some patience. You can buy these double-sided foam sand blocks that work real well for final sand. There's a fine side and a slightly rougher side. I don't know what the grit is on them. I think it's probably 100, 150, something like that. Okay. I usually work the fine side pretty much. And you can see where the scratches are from the heavier sandpaper if you look. You can see right in here, John.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to try and do is smooth those out as much as possible, going with the grain, although with this finer grit it isn't absolutely critical. You can use a bit of a circular motion if you want. It won't really hurt it. If you get a really dark area, you may want to go back to your little bit heavier grit of paper.
Well, that might be covered up by the whipping.
Right, yeah, well, right there, it won't be a problem. We'll just very lightly take that out with a little heavier grit. It was just a little dark. There's been occasions when the epoxy maybe doesn't hold as well as it should. So usually I use an old screw that's already got a pilot hole drilled in it, so that if I have to get it out, I can add a little heat, use the number one easy out, and back that back screw out, just for future repairs.
Oh, I see. So you just go in there and bore that out a little bit with a drill bit?
This was one that we'd actually bored out a little bit before. Just a 1/16 bit.
A 1/16. Okay.
Yeah. Small as you can get.
And then you can get that out with an
you
easy
can
out.
take a new, you can take one like this and actually pre-drill it a little bit before you install it.
I see.
So I'll take that, put it in a vise, and I'll just start a little pilot hole with it. And that's just anticipating a possible failure down the road where I might have to take the head off.
Right.
It's easier than trying to drill it while it's in there. If you've already got it, all you have to do is clean it out, throw the number one easy out into it, and you usually can pop them out.
Okay.
Preparing for the worst. All right, we're working the back of the club here. And it just takes a little time. You can see where the scratches are once you get used to doing it. While we've got it in here, we'll just turn it a little bit and we'll work around that back weight. You can see there's a little bit of discrepancy there in the back weight, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. I might try to get it out with a little heavier, but it's just cosmetic and I don't worry about it too much. There are times when you'll have to pour a new back weight, and that's a different topic for a different time.
Well, you just put a little mold over that and heat up the lead.
A couple of ways to do it. Yeah, you can use plumber's putty and build a mold around it and drop it into there. You always want to drill it out so there's a place for the lead to go.
Okay, so you're just wetting that down a little bit.
Trying to bring out a little bit of the
so you can
stamping, yeah.
look at the engravings in here. Yeah, we can kind of see a little bit what we got here.
Now, before I start, I'm going to slide over here and I'm going to sharpen this a little bit. A little bit better edge on that.
Okay, just
This is a pin vise. I just ordered 2 of them from China on eBay. They're $1.50 a piece. And the bits that are in it are just old drill bits that have broken and become dulled where they can't be sharpened anymore. I just keep all my old bits. You can buy drill bits by the gross for not that much money if you just shop them.
So you dampen that wood, and that kind of brings out the
It gets it where you
the
can
wood slightly.
yeah, you can
kind of see what's going on, and then you just kind of go in and trace around it, or trace inside the groove a little bit.
best you can, yeah.
And that's really about all you can do, huh?
It takes a steady hand, and mine isn't always the best as I get older.
Yeah, it looks pretty good right there.
But this gives me just enough for the old outline that I can see it or guess where it is. I've got to do something here. It's just cold enough today that my...
So you don't really do a back and forth, you just kind of keep tracing around,
Yeah,
almost like you're rewriting it.
exactly.
It's not a scrubbing or a back and forth sort of thing as much.
It depends a little bit on the depth of the stamping. I'm reinventing some of this.
Looks good. Okay, so
Once I'm done, I'll do a very light sand just to fill it with sawdust.
Alright, we can really see that now.
You can see it better.
Yeah.
We'll have to do it again after the poly goes on it before we put paint in it. Now we've done this side. You can see that one's still in pretty good shape.
We're really good on that. Yep.
Yeah, we're going to look at it a little bit. I want to just double check it.
Okay, Mike. So here's kind of like the basic colors, popular colors that we would typically see in the old persimmons. So starting from the right over here would be your kind of blonde.
This is a blonde light oak. That club's a good enough grain that I could have done no stain at all on it and it would have been pretty.
Right.
This one actually is a light oak with a little bit of walnut mixed into it. And wood can take stain differently. You can use the same stain on two different clubs and it'll look a little different. This one's more of a rosewood.
Kind of a rosewood, right?
This is a walnut. This is the original Armor Red Burgundy.
Armor Red Burgundy.
And that's a black.
It almost looks opaque, the Armor Red Burgundy.
They're actually painted. They're not really a
It's not really a stain, and then we would have the black.
Yeah.
Which we would see a lot. So those are basically the common traditional colors that we would see.
The rule of thumb is the better the grain and the better the club cleans up without any of the old stain in it, the lighter you can go.
Right.
This one, maybe I did that just because I like the color. In fact, I'm not sure I did that club. This one, just a pretty, looks good
I know
in
you
Brunette.
necessarily
You can
do
see
always
the
club.
grain's a little off the toe. So by going a little darker,
These
you
are
don't
just
accentuate
things
it.
that we pulled off the rack over here. We can see Mike's got a lot of golf clubs over here on his rack. He's kind of a fanatic here. We got a lot of irons and of course the shop and everything. That's all Mike's doing here. the hoarding
You're looking there.
collector of of all the tools and clubs and
Badly needs a cleanup.
well, it's a shop. It's a working shop, and this is what we want to see. All right, what are you going to show us here, Mike?
Stains are a little bit messy, so I typically use a rubber glove nitrile, or you can use pretty much anything that just keeps you from getting stain all over your finger. The stains that I use, these are the old style that Golfsmith and Maltby both used. These are very hard to find. If you see them on eBay and you want to do club repair work, I'd buy them up.
Well, we don't want to tell everybody that.
No, but they're hard to find, and I've bought most of them up. I've got a supply to last me. Lacking that, you can go to commercial stains. Bear any of the good oil-based or, well, actually, they're almost all oil-based. So there are some water-based ones. Will work well too. You just have to experiment with the colors that you like.
Right.
And see how they work. But they work fine.
Well, there's certainly no rules in the staining. You can stain them up however you want.
Yeah, however you want.
But just kind of in the traditional, when you're doing a restoration, sometimes it's nice to paint that 57 Chevy the color of a 57 Chevy, right?
All right. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this. One of the old ways was that you masked off the surface with a masking agent. And you can still buy that at good stores. It's too much trouble. What I do, and it seems to work pretty well for me, is I'll use an old t-shirt, kind of like those of you who spend any time in the service, you wrap it around your finger like you're going to spit shine your boots. We decided to try the walnut. And this is where I usually spill it. I put a little on the finger, and then I'm going to just see what it looks like on this club to see if we like it. We'll do that part of the neck.
That makes sense.
Different woods take stains differently. And you can mix and match. I could use that. I could add a little bit of rosewood to it, or burgundy even, and I'd get a different custom color. So that doesn't look too bad, John. I think you want to try the rosewood too?
I think that looks pretty good.
All right, we're going to go with this then. All right.
It's a nice color. It's not going on there real dark.
All of these stains will darken up when you put the paste filler on them. So you're going to get a little darker color. Now, because this is a fiber insert, I'm not worried about staining it. If I were, and maybe it was white, I would mask that off with some clear tape, cut around it, so that it didn't stain the insert. But we're not going to worry about it here.
All right.
This is the trickiest part of the whole staining operation, right there.
Well, that was a
That's
nice,
the hardest part.
smooth sweep.
I don't know if you saw that well, but all I did was I worked around
Right
it,
around like
followed
that.
the line,
Followed the line.
tried to make it nice and smooth.
Yeah, it sure looks good.
All right, now we'll
It's
just...
kind of the fun part now, isn't it?
Well, in a way, yeah, it really is. It's the hard work's done on this club.
Yeah, I would hope so. Let's hope the hard work's done.
And I'm just using this. See, this one isn't coming out as dark as the other walnut. This is a little lighter.
And you think that's got to do with this piece of wood, maybe? Huh?
It has a lot to
Just
do
the
with
way
it.
that
With the different wood, it will
absorbing
look
a
different.
stain.
Of the 4 clubs in this set, there's liable to be a color differentiation between the wood and how they absorb the stain.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. You give it your best shot and see what happens. You want to watch this angle. You want to get a nice delineation between those two. There's nothing wrong with a second coat if you so choose. I look for any light spots. Put a little extra on the top.
Well, it sure is pretty.
Alright, we're going to set that down for a minute while I put the top on so I don't spill it. Normally I'd just let this air dry. It'd take about 5 minutes. But for the purpose of this, I'll show you an alternate method, which is to use your heat gun and you can force dry it. Don't get too close. You can burn the wood.
Oh, that's working pretty fast.
See, it's lighter. See how it comes up a little lighter?
Wow, that's...
But we'll get most of that color back when we put the oil-based filler on it. Now, I sense a little unevenness there. So we're going to put a second coat on.
Okay. Okay, we're going to just do one more little touch-up on the grooves here.
One little touch-up. We're just going to make sure they're nice and even and straight before we start.
And we're not going to cut into the screws themselves.
No, we're going to run right up to them.
Right up to them. Okay. So what do we got here now?
This is a product that's kind of hard to find. I got this at Ace. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. They do have full cans. I've found that the half can works better. You don't waste it because it does dry out. It's called Wood Perfect, and it's a wood filler. Caution, it's not the same as plastic wood. Those are not the same.
Not the same, okay. So we don't want plastic wood for this.
Nope. Not at all. This is compatible with mineral spirits, good real mineral spirits. I'll take a little bit on my finger. I've thinned this a little bit, and you can see it gets hard, but there's a lot of good down there. It's good for quite a while yet. Now what we're going to do is just smear it over the club.
Just over everything, huh?
Just over everything, any
Insert
wooden
everything.
metal surface. Sometimes I'll put it in the vise. Whoop, sorry. And if it's a little thick, rather than thin it in there, I just pour a little bit of liquid onto my glove.
What is this liquid here?
That is your mineral spirits.
Mineral spirits, okay.
I work it into the stampings. I actually want it in there because it helps preserve them till I can re-engrave them.
Well, this isn't a step I've ever done, so this is new.
What
to
this
me.
does, it keeps you from getting orange peel effect and gives you better adhesion on the poly.
So in a sense, it's almost like a primer for the poly.
Yeah, it is. It fills the grains of the wood. I just rub it in real good. And I rub it off.
And you just take it off.
Let me grab something here. Old toothbrush or a cheap one from the dollar store. What I'm going to do is get that filler out of the
The grooves. Huh?
grooves while I can and out of the screws to include the bottom screws on the sole plate.
Well, this seems like a real important process right
This
here.
is a very important process if you want a good finish and an
Maybe that's
adhesive
why my
finish.
finishes never turn out as good as yours.
Wood with a little work. Now, I get as much as I can with the paper towel. The old book said to use burlap, but I find a paper towel works real well. I'm getting a lot of that off. Clean my glove up because I can reuse it again.
Probably had more burlap laying around than paper towels back in the
Probably
50s.
so. Now, what we're going to do, tighten that down real well. We're going to use an old towel. I just happen to have a microfiber cloth, and we're just going to buff it like we're shining our shoes. Sometimes for this process, you're better off using one of these because they don't move around as much
hold the
than the
shaft.
poly vice jaws. But I'm just rubbing it. I'm trying to get as much of that filler out of there as I can. It's also an opportunity to look for sand marks that maybe you didn't get sanded out, and you could certainly do a light touch-up, apply a little bit of stain, a little bit more filler, and it'll blend in nicely.
There we go. That's sure.
This light mark is just a feature of the wood. There's nothing wrong there. It's just the way that wood took the stain. It's a little harder there, perhaps.
Well, it sure gives it a beautiful look.
Now, at times, just for grins and giggles, I have used the stain on the face, too. And it makes a very attractive club.
Like
There's
they
really
did-
nothing wrong with
They
that.
did in that in the 1940s.
Yeah,
often
they
that.
did.
I know
He-
Wilson did that in the 40s a lot.
If you don't want to take the time to try and get that line, just do the whole thing in one color. Nothing wrong with that. I don't like it in black, but I don't mind it in the lighter colors. All right, now we're going to set that club down. We're going to let it dry overnight.
All right.
Okay?
Okay, we'll be back. Okay, so we are back, and our club is ready to be. We're going to be doing the dipping now, right?
Yep. What I'll do is I'll take a couple of sheets of toilet paper. There's 4 there. I'll fold them like that, and what I'm going to do is wrap that around the neck of the club just below the ferrule. The idea is to,
You just put a rubber band around that.
yeah, to catch any poly so it doesn't drip down the shaft, saves you a little cleanup. Usually after the first dip it'll stay on its own. You can take the elastic band off if you want, but I use it just about like that.
All right.
Hold on a minute.
Okay, what do we?
I've noticed a very small problem here I'm going to address. You see that little opening in that ferrule that we glued on? We're going to fix that with a little bit of plastic wood, which won't really delay our process much. This is what the plastic wood's good for. This has gotten a little thick, but we'll see if it'll work. Just work it into that crack. And let it dry. All right, that's good.
Okay, so we got the poly here. Now, what are we using? Oil, water-based?
This is a clear gloss. I believe this is an oil-based poly. It doesn't say. It's just poly. I think is it's just its own material. I don't know that it's oil or water-based.
I know from
either one.
doing some other work that there is the oil and the water-based.
There probably is. It seems compatible with the oil-based filler. Now, it's important that you try and keep this clean. Don't get any dust in it. I've used this can a little bit recently, but it's pretty new, and I don't think I've got enough volume between where the level of the poly is and the top to dip that club and not have it run over. So I'm just going to sacrifice a little bit, and I'm going to decant it into this plastic container that I use just for this purpose. Now, I'll take a little poly, or a little toilet paper.
clean that up so you
Well,
can...
I'm not going to clean it up. I'm just going to let it wick a little bit while I'm working. That'll save me some time. Now, sometimes the heads are so big that they won't fit in there, in which case you add the rest of the poly in and you dip out of the container. You don't want to leave it in the container because it'll dry on you. We're okay here, so we're going to put that in there. We'll tilt it just a little bit. We're going to take it out. I'm going to let a little bit run off the toe. Turn it over, let it run off the heel. I could stand and hold it, but at this point I'm going to put it in the vise and just let it drip off, toe slightly open.
With the toe slightly open, that's important, right?
Well, it helps it drain off the face
Drains
better.
off the face better, right? Well, that's a good tip. Well, it sure looks nice when you dip it in that poly, doesn't it?
It does. They do make a satin poly that you can use. It also gives a very nice finish. It's nice sometimes not to have a gloss, especially on the older clubs.
Well, it's whatever you want to do, isn't it?
Yep, there's all kinds of stuff out there. Poly's not super expensive. It runs 10 to 15 bucks a can, but you want to kind of preserve your poly for as long as you can use it a long time if you just keep a good seal on the lid. Most of these polys are compatible with real oil-based mineral spirits. And again, a lot of the mineral spirits are not oil-based, especially if you live in California. So you have to be a little bit careful what you buy. All right, we've let that pretty much quit dripping. I'm going to take it out. I'm going to hold it up like this. I'm going to watch it drip off the neck and kind of help it with my finger a little bit.
Now what happens if you get a little bubble in there, or you see a couple of those? I've had that happen where you get a couple little bubbles.
You try not to, but you can do a light steel wool on, maybe even a sand.
You
And
wait until it dries a little bit?
we have to wait until it dries. What I'll do sometimes,
Okay, so if you do get a little bubble,
you can, more than a little bubble, what you're probably going to find is a little piece of lint. And you can take a screwdriver or a toothpick and just very lightly remove it sometimes if you're careful.
and then how long do we need to let that set up?
You want to let it, I usually let it sit up overnight.
And it wouldn't make any sense to try and
No.
speed that up with a heat gun or anything?
No, you wouldn't. You just want to let it air dry now. And it's going to take about 3 coats on this. After 3 coats, you do start getting runs. You won't get bubbles, but you get runs.
Get some runs.
It's usually when you put too much poly on. But a run's not the worst thing in the world if you need coverage and want to keep the face in good shape. So we try to do them as good cosmetically as we can, but sometimes protection's more in order. So at this point, if I'm doing multiple clubs, what I'll do is I'll place it, if I'm getting ready to dip another club, I'll place it in this little drying rack I have, which is an old style 8 club carrier. I think we talked about that before. And you can see it setting at a 45-degree angle. If you were just doing one club, you could certainly set that up in your vise at that angle.
Yeah, so you keep the toe up and you let everything
Yep,
drip
maybe
down.
slightly out, let it
If
drip.
there's any drip, it's going to drip down the back of the neck, down here,
And it's running.
and then it's going to run and it's going to hit into that tissue.
Exactly.
And that's what we want to do. So that's about it for now, huh?
That's bad. Well, after a little bit, let's say I've dipped another club and I want to put it in. Just before I take it off of the vise at the angle where it's dripping, I'll take this and I'll put it in this rack.
So you got
Now I'm drying it straight up and down.
straight up and down. And you would typically wait a couple hours on that, maybe, or before?
Oh
you do
no,
that?
I'd let that sit overnight.
But,
Oh, you mean on this
yeah,
rack?
going from this rack over to
No, I
this
do
other
it fairly
rack?
quickly.
Do it fairly quickly.
Once it's run down smooth, I'll put it up
And
there.
and you're confident that there's no more runs.
When the poly's new and still pretty thin and it hasn't thickened up, you won't really get runs.
Okay.
This is what they look like when they've gotten some extra dips on it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
This is one of John's students' clubs. He saw that last week and it's quite a bit different.
Yeah, wow. Well, I remember that. It looks great.
Steve McGee's.
All right, Steve McGee. Well, that club is on its way.
Now, quit filming. This is an important step. You want to clean this lid depression out as well as you can. I'll sometimes add a little bit of thinner to thin out the stickiness in there.
These are the tips from an experienced craftsman.
Well,
here.
it just saves you having your poly dry out and develop
My poly always dries out.
a skim. You want to keep it as clean as you can. Including this piece. So I'll work around in here. I try and get it out of that recess when it's no longer running in there. No reason spending more than you have to.
We don't want to waste toilet paper, do we?
You probably will never use more than a half a can of poly. You just won't. Now, we've got to remember at this point, I'm going to carefully pour this poly back in.
And there we go.
You lose an amazing amount of this stuff. I can let that drain like that, and it'll keep coming for 20 minutes if I don't quit.